Should you edit your own podcast? This is a question that I get asked all the time, and it can be a big point of contention because there are a lot of differing opinions out there. So today I have a special guest and time optimization expert, Shawn Shewchuk, here in the studio today. And our goal is not to give you the answer to this question, but to give you what you need to be thinking about as the CEO of your business and the host of your podcast so that you can answer this question for yourself based on your level in business, the size of your team, your goals for your business, and your goals for your podcast. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Shawn, I see this all the time in the podcasting space. People will DM me on Instagram and they'll be like, Courtney, should I edit my own podcast? You know, I'm kind of a perfectionist. I want it done a certain way. I can't tell you how many sales calls I've sat down with people who have told me the exact same thing verbatim. You know, I'm a perfectionist. I want it done this way. I'm kind of picky. And that's valid. Okay, I'm a perfectionist too. But for most of our listeners, they're in the more advanced stages in business. Most of them have already crossed 6 figures in revenue. They are scaling to 7 figures. And many of them are considering a podcast for their business as a lead generation tool. Or they have a podcast, but it's not growing like they want it to. And I think across the board, for 99% of them at least, most of them have started that podcast because they want to better leverage their time, which is why this question is always such an interesting one to me. Because if you were really thinking like a 7-figure CEO, then I don't think you'd even be asking this question. On the flip side, though, I get why people ask it because they do value their time. And maybe they can't see yet how investing in an editor will actually make them more money in the long run by freeing up their time now. So can you speak to this? How we as business owners and podcasters specifically should weigh out what we need to be spending our time on in our business and by extension, our podcast.
So this is a big topic, but I'll say this. A paradigm, it typically is described as, and Bob Proctor used to describe it as a group of habits or practices that is not our own. Unsolicited gifts from outside, educators, influences, parents, et cetera, as we grew up, which, would then tell us that, of course, the decisions we make are not our own. They're based on the paradigms, and we're making the same decisions that mom and dad and whoever else was in our life as we grew up. Those, as we know, impressionable years. So the paradigm shift is definitely a necessity, but let's come back to the time question. We've been told for, I can't tell you how many generations, that we need to manage time. And here's the reality. I took my watch off specifically for this because you can't stop this thing. So you can't manage time. You get all there is, but you can manage the activities and the time that you're fortunate enough to be blessed with. So the question then begs itself, what are you doing with the very limited amount of time, the only non-renewable resources we all know, to grow, expand, and scale your business? And if you're in business, but you don't want to do this, you might want to rethink why you're in business. Because the reality of why most of us made a decision to become entrepreneurs, or as Bob Proctor used to say, jump off the building and grow wings on the way down. The reality of this is that we're goal-seeking organisms. So if you want something, you're going to go after it. That's why you got into business. Because you wanted, is one word, and everyone laughs when I say that it's the F word that we all love to talk about, and it's freedom. And freedom is defined in 3 ways: the ability to do what you want, when you want, and with whom. It encompasses everything, but it all comes back to the understanding that what you need to be doing, you aren't in most cases. If you take a look at what some of the experts say, we'll talk about Michael E. Gerber in his book E-Myth, and he talks about entrepreneurs, or those who think they are, and they're really good at whatever it is they do, whether they're a consultant or a graphic designer or whomever they are, but they're not really entrepreneurs. And just because you can go incorporate a corporate entity company in your jurisdiction doesn't mean you're an entrepreneur. He calls them technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure. So it's doing. That just means you're doing what you're normally doing. In order to grow, expand, and scale, there's somewhere you need to start. And one is a decision, an irrevocable decision that you're going to do it. The second one, and this is so important, and if you don't know this, haven't done this, and want to scale, you need to know what you should not be doing. So I want you to sit down and make a list. What are those things you shouldn't be doing inside your business? Because there are lists, and I would I'm not a betting man, but I'd wager a bet that you're doing a lot of things you should not be doing. And if you're doing anything that, you'll use a term that everybody's familiar with, below your pay grade, so to speak, you shouldn't be doing it. I met a gentleman on an airplane, and we had a conversation about what I did. And he phoned me about 3 months later and said, we want to work with you. Maybe. Can you come see us? And so I hopped on another plane and I went to see them. And we ended up deciding to work together. We worked together for 2 years, but it was interesting. Our agreement took place or started, I guess, on the first day of the following month. And I wasn't there that day, but it was a husband and wife team. They built this company from, the bedroom in the basement all the way up to, I don't know, $35 million. And she phoned me at about 6:00 that evening. And I saw the number and I answered. And she said, oh my gosh, Shawn, you wouldn't believe how incredible a day it was. I said, that's awesome. What happened? She shared with me. I said, well, what did you do to move the needle? And the phone went silent. I said, what did you do that moved the company forward? Silence. And I looked at the clock and I said, well, what are you doing now? She goes, oh, well, all the staff are gone at 5. I said, I understand. I said, but what are you doing there? She goes, well, I'm cleaning the restrooms and I'm emptying the waste paper baskets. I said, you're doing that? She goes, well, yeah, I'm not too proud. And I said, well, this has nothing to do with pride. It's got to do with the fact that you're one of the, you're driving this company. And we get caught up in this. When you start, you're wearing a lot of hats. I get that. And you don't necessarily have the money to go out and hire 2, 3, 4, 5 staff. But what we need to understand, and I'll give you one simple example. You can hire a bookkeeper for 2 hours a week at $25 an hour, $30 an hour, whatever it is. That's $60 a week. We're not talking about a crazy amount of money. So you need to download, delegate, and automate. There are 3 things you need to do in your business if you're going to grow. Once you've established what you shouldn't be doing, and you've become exceptionally clear on the destination, where you are going, and then you take that, and let's use a dollar figure as a destination, because hopefully by a certain point in time in our lives, we all understand the value of a dollar. And let's reverse engineer that. Let's break it down by year, month, week, day, and even for guys like me, perhaps with a touch of undiagnosed ADHD, let's break it down by hour. What do I need to do in this hour? How much do I need to generate? And what are, and this is how you align them, what are the high leverage activities that are going to ensure I generate that? Because you'll find out that if you take $1 million and break it down by 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, depending on what, and most entrepreneurs, let's be clear, it's about 6 days a week, some more, but 6 days a week, 10 hours a day is not uncommon. It's not a lot of money every hour. You pay your attorney or your accountant more than that usually when you're there doing work for you. So it's not really a far-fetched idea that you can do this. And once we understand it and it's in its simplicity, it becomes easy to execute on. And that's the difference. It's not about taking action. It's about execution on what we know those predetermined steps are.
Yes. And the clarity piece, because this, Shawn, I think is really big for so many of us as entrepreneurs who are transitioning from the wearing all the hats stage to, okay, now I don't want to be wearing all the hats anymore. And what do I need to focus on? It can feel so confusing, and we're bombarded with so many outside voices of what you should do, what you need to do, how often you need to do it, show up consistently. Don't miss a day of posting on social media. If you're podcasting, make sure you get that episode out there every week, not to mention our own family responsibilities. If you're a parent, school drop-offs, school pickups, right? And just the day-to-day life stuff that we also have to manage. When someone is in this state, transitioning out, and they're like, yes, I buy into everything you're saying. I know this is what I need to do. What do I need to stop doing? Let's talk about time. How much time does that usually take? Because I think as entrepreneurs, we want everything right away. We're like instant gratification people. And we want to know that, okay, if I need to get sales calls off of my plate, well, I want it done tomorrow. But the reality of that is by the time you bring someone in and maybe have them trained up to do what they need to do to fully take that off your plate, there's an element of time there too. So how can we begin to set these more, let's say, realistic expectations as we start to offload and begin to free up our time?
You're going to take that list of things that you should not be doing, and you're going to make a decision based on priority. Take that list and decide what is a priority. If you want to take sales calls off, that's fine. But sales is one of the toughest things to hire for, because they don't have your passion. They don't have your drive. I met a gentleman, this is about 3 or 4 months ago. I was coming out of a restaurant with my sons. And down the little strip mall where the restaurant was another restaurant. And a gentleman, his wife and son walked out of that restaurant. This gentleman used to work for me years and years ago when I had a full head of hair. And we met in the parking lot as we went to our vehicles. And I said, hey, how are you? Shook hands, this kind of thing. Said hello to his wife and his son. He said, oh, times are tough, Shawn. I said, oh, what's going on? So companies having hard times. We're nosediving. I said, oh, what happened? He goes, staff, they drove it into the ground. Garbage. The staff didn't drive anything anywhere. He's the one driving. So if you're having challenges, I want you to think about that for a second. This gentleman I spoke to yesterday, I said, your number one priority. There is nothing higher in your business. We're not talking about family. I have 2 great kids. I dropped them off at school this morning, and I'll pick them up today. And they have Taekwondo tonight. I understand these pressures in life. I get that. But your number one priority is sale, business generation. If you aren't selling, you aren't in business. And I want to make this clear because we are, and this applies across the entire spectrum of what we have to do as entrepreneurs. I don't care if it's marketing, if it's brand building, if it's a podcast, if it's making phone calls, returning phone calls, follow up and follow through are the 2 areas that we, generally speaking, drop the ball. Okay. So find out what those priorities are. I was in Reno, Nevada, speaking at an event at one of the casino hotels a few years ago. There's about 1,700 people in the room. And this conversation is one of the conversations we were having. And they had set up microphones in the audience. So it was very interactive. And I had a very elderly woman come up and say, and I talked about how I don't mow my own lawn. Do I know how? Yeah, sure. I did it my whole life, but I don't do it. Not because I don't know how, or I think I'm bitter to anyone that does. I just don't. I don't clean my own home. Not because I think I'm better than anyone that does, because my time is better leveraged doing other things that produce outcomes that I need and want, and so do our clients. And she stood up to the microphone. She said, Mr. Shewchuk, I wish I would have found someone like you to marry me because I wouldn't have to do any of my housework. And on the flip side, I think maybe you're a little bit pompous. Now, I want you to think about this. And for any of you that have spoken from stage, and your response at a time like this determines the outcome of this presentation. Because there's 1,700 plus people in this room, you could have heard a pin drop. And you can respond in an aggressive way or an assertive way. You can put this person in their place, or you turn it around. And so I was on stage and I got down on one knee as if I was going to propose and ask her to come up on the stage. Well, of course, 1,700 people laughed and we diffused the situation. And the point in all this is you have situations over which you have zero control sometimes. You face things every day in your business where you don't know that they're going to happen. The ones you do know are where you get into trouble. And here's what that is. There are things you relish, you love to do every day, but there are things you don't necessarily like or relish. And those ones, human nature says, we're going to move those to the far corner of the desk. And all of a sudden, then we find ourselves in this unfortunate situation. We don't necessarily want to take responsibility because we're the ones that created this by some kind of procrastination of pushing it aside because it's not something we enjoy. And then they become fires. And so we spend the rest of our time, it could be that day, it could be the week, the month, putting out fires and being that firefighter. And the challenge with that is when you become a firefighter, those activities are not high leverage activities. They're trying to solve a problem that wouldn't be there if we had done the work we should have, even the stuff we didn't like, in the first place. So there's a lot of ways to do this, but really figure out what the priorities are. Don't do those things like, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to surround myself with absolutely brilliant people. And that's the key. You find what you're good at and you stick with it. And the rest, you download, delegate, and automate.
One of the things I'm hearing you say, which you didn't actually say, and I'd like for you to speak to this, is how much do we have to trust ourselves in this process? Because we're bombarded with all these messages, right? We've got all this input coming in. Yes, we can be clear on our priorities, and that makes it a little easier to say no to certain things that don't seem to fit that list. But there are also those opinions that come in as well about what we should be doing. Maybe we've hired and paid money for coaches to tell us what to do. What about when those messages don't align with the priorities that we've set for ourselves?
Here's the reality. If you have the right coach, and I want to be clear about something from a coaching perspective for just a second, there's this proliferation of modalities that coaches claim to be experts in. And I've been coaching longer than there have been coaches. I've been doing this 28 years, maybe more. And when people say, how long you've been coaching, I say, well, there were no coaches, outside of sports when I started doing this. And not all coaches are created equal. I want to be very clear. Most coaches can't afford to pay attention, never mind their bills. So be careful who you decide you're going to work with. So that's number one. Number two, you need to figure out, based on your objectives, what it is you're going to do and make a decision to do it, notwithstanding what anyone else has to say. Your biggest detractors in life are going to be the people closest to you usually. Okay. Now, I don't know the exact reason for that, but it can even be family. I think at a level that maybe they don't realize, subconscious level, they don't want you to be more successful than them, but that's only an opinion as far as I'm concerned. You decide what you're going to do. You make a decision what you're going to do, and then you go out and execute on that. So you talked about clarity. You referenced that. So it's clarity, focus, and execution. Focus, so clarity, obviously, you know, it's unobstructed view of where you're going. Clarity to focus to the exclusion of all outside distractions, and then execution on the predetermined action steps. You're going to encounter those days where, you know, in the question you alluded to this, you're going to encounter those days where you find that it's not exactly what you decided it was going to be, and where you wake up in the morning and you will question. This is human nature. I'm not perfect, and I don't claim to be God, and I don't think anyone is or can. There are days where, like, am I doing the right thing? Is this what I should be? Are these the steps I should be taking? And if you have the right coach, I encourage you to ensure you do, because that's where it comes into play. If you look at every truly successful person today throughout history, they had a coach, and they may not have used the term coach, but they had a coach. And I'm not talking about mentorship. There's a vast difference between mentorship and coaching. A mentor can be someone that's a friend. A coach is someone that's going to hold your feet to the fire and doesn't become your friend during that process. You know, that's sometimes tough to hear. And for those people that go out and get a coach and then decide not to do what that coach tells them they should do or suggests they should do in order to achieve what it is they want to, think about this. Why are you paying them?
Yeah, that is such a great point. You know, Shawn, you have shared so much with us here today and given us so much to think about. And I thank you for that, because I know how valuable your time is. And I hope that for you listening right now, this episode has given you the perspective you need, not just on the question that we posed about whether you should be editing your own podcast, but on your business as a whole, and where you should be spending your number one most valuable asset, your time. And as the host of your podcast, another question that you need to ask yourself at all times is, what is the better use of my time? In this instance, editing your show, or learning how to identify and fix what causes your audience to tune you out, and honing your ability as a podcast host to influence people to take action simply by using your voice. So, speaking of a valuable use of your time, in the next episode, I am bringing back one of our favorite guests to share 4 powerful techniques with you that you can use to keep your listeners engaged until the very end of every episode, and turn each episode into a powerful lead generation tool that ultimately drives conversions back to your courses, your programs, or your services. So don't go anywhere, because that's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.